Hello class. Today this video is about a follow-up to doing the Hello World problem. In past classes I've just had people do Hello World and that's about as complex as it gets for week 1. But the problem is that by week 2 we really ratchet up the intensity to nested loops and then people are caught off guard. So I decided this time I'm going to give you some of those nested loops up front and also show you how to debug, because the other thing I've learned is that students who learn how to debug can really help themselves and learn more throughout the entire quarter. So I'm going to be teaching you debugging from the very first week, and I think this is hopefully going to help you. So here's my Hello World program. By now you've created this Hello World program. You can do, I'm going to do run Control F11. You can see that it spits out Hello World here. But what I'm going to do next is give you a nested loops problem and show you exactly how to do it. You won't have to figure out how to do it on your own. I want you to watch as I create this, and this is really going to help you next week when you do your Space Needle problem. So this figure right here, this is the figure that I want to print out. And I've just put these numbers here so that you can see the number of columns. The way you want to approach these problems, and this is very similar to the Space Needle homework, is first you want to think about, write some pseudocode for how you're going to solve this problem. So this is a big jump in complexity from last week, where you would have just created 4 println statements for these. That's simple enough, but we're really moving up in intensity now. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a for loop, several nested for loops actually. So the first thing we're going to do is we've noticed that we have 4 rows to draw here. So I say my pseudocode is for each row from 1 to 4. And you may ask, well, why don't I just write the code for it? Well, the reason why we write pseudocode instead of real code is because frequently students make mistakes. And then when you turn that in, I can't tell what the original intent was. Are you really trying to print 4 rows? Are you trying to print 5 rows or 3 rows? What your error was. So this way you're just writing in English language and I can tell exactly what you're trying to do. Okay, so don't write real code. Just write an English equivalent that is extremely clear as to what you're trying to do. Okay, so what are we going to do in those 4 rows? Well, we're going to print out this little slash. We're going to print out a bunch of colons, and we're going to print that backslash. So I've got, very simply, here's the slash and here's the backslash. And then in the middle here, I've got the code to print out the colons. So each time for these 4 rows, the number of colons has to change, right? So what I've said here is for each colon 1, 2, and then I've just said colon expression, we're going to print a colon. And what we're going to do next is try to figure out what is that colon expression. And by the way, always I would suggest for beginners, you always write your for loops when you're doing these nested for loops. Write it from 1 to whatever. Okay, later on in the course you'll see that sometimes it's advantageous to write it from 0 or from 4 to 1, going down, etc. But I'm going to teach you a way that's very straightforward that will always work, how to figure out these nested loops, but you really need to do it from 1 to whatever, okay? So what we're going to do, and this is shown in the book in detail, and I would really encourage you to read the detailed examples in the book if this doesn't make sense. So I'm going to write down some comments here, and I want you throughout this entire course, whenever you do nested for loops, to do the exact same commenting, okay? I'm going to ask you this time and time again, so get used to it. First, I want you to write out the expression for what your outer loop is, okay? And a lot of times, students ask me, do nested loops always look like some sort of a 2-dimensional figure? And no, they don't always in reality. But for this course, they're usually always going to look like some sort of a 2-dimensional thing where the outer loop is controlling the rows here going down, and then the columns are controlling what you're printing across, okay? It's even true when we start to do graphics. So the row, as I said, will always be 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? So, not obviously 4, it could be 1 to 10, whatever, but some fixed number starting at 1, okay? The next thing to figure out is, so in this particular problem, you have to print out a certain number of spaces. So in this first row, might just put, here, let me just write this so it's clear. This is be my row, okay? I'll write that. So in row 1, I've got 0 spaces, okay? In row 2, I've got 1 space there. In row 3, I've got 2 spaces. In row 4, I've got 3 spaces. So I write that. So row 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces, 0, 1, 2, 3. Now what I need to do is come up with an expression to calculate based on each row, 1, 2, 3, 4, how many spaces do I need? So 1, 2, 3, 4 rows need to give me 0, 1, 2, 3 spaces. So we don't have to get very complex about this because it's pretty straightforward. All I need to do is use row minus 1. That in row 1 will give me 0, in row 2 will give me 1, row 3 will give me 2, and row 4 will give me 3, okay? So this one is pretty straightforward. Now let's take a look at the colons. So again, we have to figure out how many colons are in each row. And I figured out that for row 1, we have 8 colons. In row 2, we've got 6 colons. For row 3, I've got 4 colons. And row 4, I've got 2 colons. So I've got to figure out what the colons expression is. And this is a good example for the most complicated possible scenario, okay? And I'm going to tell you how to do it in every case, okay? There's basically 2 things you need to worry about in figuring out this expression. And an analogy I can use, and I can only use it really because I'm going to suggest that you use rows that go from 1 to a higher number, is you can think of this like in geometry, figuring out the slope of a line, the expression for a line. A line is determined by a slope and a y-intercept. Okay, so first we have to figure out what is the slope of this line. You might imagine, okay, here I've actually brought up a tool that'll show me a drawing here. So you see here's the x-axis and the y-axis of a line. You can imagine that this 1, 2, 3, 4 represents the x-axis, and this 8, 4, 6, 2 represents the y-axis. So it's going to look something like a steep line, something like that, okay? And so we have to figure out the slope, which is how steep the line is, okay? And so the slope is actually a factor of 2 because you can see that for 1 we need 1, 2, 3, 4, it goes 8, 6, 4, 2. I don't know, maybe it's not obvious, but you can see that this is jumping up by a factor of 2 each time. This is incrementing by 1 each time, but they're inversely related, okay? So we have to figure out how to make that inverse relationship. But the first thing I know is that this number here is going to be the multiplication factor of the row is going to be 2, okay? So what would it look like if it's 3? So then this might be 9, 6, 3, 1. Or what it would look like if it was 4. Well, that might be, let's do it the other way. It could be 2, 8, 6. Okay, I'm not sure if I'm doing that right, but you can see that the factors go up by larger amounts. Okay, so we figured out that the multiplication factor is 2. That's really the slope of the line. The other thing you have to figure out when you're coming up with the formula for a line is the y-intercept, right? And so just like that, we're also having to figure out what is the offset for this. And so we already know that it's got to be negative because while these numbers are going positive, these numbers are going down. So that means that it's negative in front of this multiplication. And then we have to just plug in the numbers to figure out what the offset is. So what we need to do is we just plug it in the formula. So for row 1, so if row is 1, that makes this -2. But what we need is an 8. So what is the offset to get us 8? In order to get 8, we have to plug in 10. Okay, 10 minus 2 is going to give us 8. Let's see if that works for the next example. If the row is 2, we know that we're subtracting 4. Okay, so 10 minus 4 gives us 6. Okay, so this is how we figured it out. Let me give you a different example just as a side note, and then I'll show you how we figured it out. Here's a different example. This would correspond with this cone would be flipped upside down because they're increasing each time, and they go up by a factor of they add 3 each time rather than the 2 that you're seeing here. So if the row is 1, 2, 3, 4, the colons are 4, 7, 10, 13. So how much are these going up by each time? They're going up by 3, by 3, by 3. So I know that we've got a factor of 3 times row. And then I have to figure out what is the offset. So if row is 1 and I want to get 4, that's this becomes 3, so I know I've got to add 1. Okay, so it's going to be 1 plus that. Let's see if that works for the row 2. For row 2, this is going to be 6. 6 plus 1 is 7. And then let's always check the last one. So for row 4, that's 3 times 4 is 12, plus 1 is 13. Okay, so that's just another example of how you do it. So now let's try writing the code. I'll go ahead and delete that. No, actually, let's keep it for a second. Let's see what we can actually change the code later, and then see what happens. So I'm going to write a new routine: public static void. Let's call it top. And then first I need, if I look at my pseudocode here, I need a for row 1 to 4. Okay, so I write a for loop. So from row is equal to 1. Row less than or equal to 4, row plus plus, and again for beginners I would always do from 1 less than equal to. Okay, the next line of pseudocode is I have to print this slash here, so that's going to be a system.out.println of a slash, and we don't need to escape a slash, a forward slash, okay? So then the next line of pseudocode is I'm going to have to write this loop for the colons. Sorry. I just realized that I forgot to put in the pseudocode that I need a loop for the spaces here. Okay, so we're going to have for int space equals 1, space is less than or equal to, and I'm going to leave that blank for just a second, space plus plus. Okay, so this controls how many spaces are going to be printed here, and I'll do a system.out.println, not println, just print of space. Yeah, not println here. Println would make a new line after this. I don't want a new line. Okay. So now we got to figure out what that spaces expression is. So we've already figured out what the spaces expression is. It's row minus 1. So the outer loop here is using the variable row, which use row minus 1. Okay. Then I need to go to the loop for colon. So colon is 1, colon less than or equal to, and again I'll just leave that blank for a second, colon plus plus, and then this is going to be system.out.print of a colon character. Okay, so let's go back to this. So again, the rows are from 1 to 4. We've already printed out the spaces for each of those 4 rows. Now we needed to, oh, actually, you know what? These are reversed here. And this is fine. You know, programming is not about getting it right the first time. Okay, programming is about getting it right after you debugged it. Actually, no, you know what? I'm going to leave that there because we want to see some debugging. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do, for each of those 4 rows, we're going to print the number of colons. And we already determined that the colon is determined by 10 minus 2 times row. Okay, and then I've got to print the close. So here, oh no, it's a slash there, and it's actually a backslash, which has to be escaped there. Okay, so that's looking right. So let's see what this does. And so now I'm going to teach you some debugging. So the way that debugging works is that we get to see the actual execution of the program as we go through it. So first I'm going to set a breakpoint here on this first line of the program here. I can do that 2 ways. I can double click. You see that little blue dot that just got created right there? Or, let me double click to clear it. I can do run, and let's see, toggle breakpoint, Control-Shift-B. Okay, oops, I'm on the wrong line. Let's try that again. Run, toggle breakpoint. So that little dot becomes there. And then I'm going to use the run menu and debug, or F11. Okay, now it's going to ask you to switch debugging perspectives, which is fine. And actually, I'll tell it to remember my decision. Okay, so let me resize this window so you can see everything again. Okay, so right now it's a little bit hard to see, but there's actually a little blue arrow here where that dot is. And we know that we're in debugging because there's a red square there. That shows us that we're executing and we can stop it. Now we're going to use these two, step into and step over, which are also available in the run menu, step into and step over. It's also F5 and F6. So I'm going to step over, okay, and then it's done. And why didn't we show this new code? Well, because I didn't actually call it. So let's put that code in there. So we're going to need to call top, okay, and then let's run debug again. It's still got that breakpoint there. I'm going to step over this line and then step into this line. Okay, so now we are in the top routine, and so now we're going to step. We can, by the way, the difference between step over and step into, if I had stepped over top, it wouldn't have gone into this routine. Okay, so we stepped into it, but now I'm just going to step over these lines because we're not calling any other lines. Okay, so row, you can see, is now a local variable with a value of 1. We're going to step over again, and it just did the system print. So you can see there's the slash right there. Now we're going to go into this, and you notice that space isn't here yet. There's no variable for space. It's because we have to step. Okay, now space, it actually stepped right over this because row was 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. And since space is all 0, is already 1 is already greater than 0, it's not going to execute anything in there. Okay, so now we're in this loop here. So colon, let's step over this. Colon is now 1. Okay, and it's going to be loop from 1 to 10 minus 2 times row, so it's going to loop to 8. So I'm just going to do a bunch of step overs here and watch down here. So that just printed the first colon, second colon, third colon, and you notice that when the colon changes, it becomes yellow here. That's the fourth colon, fifth colon, sixth colon, seventh colon, eighth colon. That should be the last colon. And sure enough, it gets out and it prints that. Okay, so now let's go to row 2. So that looked like what we want. If we scroll up a little bit, that first row printed out fine. Okay, now let's go on to row 2. So now notice that row is 1. If I step now, row is 2. Okay, we're going to go into this routine now again, this loop. So space is 1, and we want to loop while space is less than row minus 1, less than or equal to. So this is going to be 1, so we should execute this once. So we're going to go in here, we see that space is 1, step over it, it executed it once, and then, okay, so we've already got a problem here. We've got a couple problems actually. So one is that we didn't put a println here, okay, and so it's already wrong because it should have put it on a separate space. But the other problem is, and it's a little bit hard to tell. Let's go on a little bit more, and I'll show you to be clear. It's printing colons. So the space is after the slash instead of before the slash. So let's go ahead and stop this, and let's fix this. So first we want to print spaces before we print that, and then after we're done here, I need to do, just make it a println. Okay, and so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a breakpoint right there. Okay, and let's do run debug. It's going to stop at this same place here. I can go ahead and clear that breakpoint by double clicking, and then I'm going to jump to the next breakpoint by going run resume or F8. Okay, so it's gotten to here. I guess I set a breakpoint there too. I'm going to go ahead and clear that breakpoint, and I'm going to, we can also let's see, where is that? Resume is right here, so we can just click this button right here. Okay, so what it did is it printed out the first line. We're just about to finish printing the first line. Okay, now we're going to go, so now we're on row 2. So now hopefully it's going to be printing at the right place. So we won't be able to see this very well, but it's going to print a space, one space. Okay, now we're going to print the backslash. See, so we're looking a lot better. We've got a new row and we've got a backslash. Now it's going to print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colons. And at that point, 2 times row, 10 minus 2 times row is going to be 6. So it should now exit the loop. And it does, and it's going to print that slash. Okay, now we've still got that breakpoint set right here, so I can just resume. It's going to print each line. Okay, so now we're done. Now row is 4, and we were only supposed to loop till row 4, so this should be the end. Okay, and that's the end of the program. All right, so what I've been trying to teach you is several things. First of all, how to do nested loops, and you want to remember how to use these expressions. By the way, I said I was going to come back to this. Let's go ahead and come back to this. If we put this in for the rows, let's see what happens. Sorry, for the colons. So what this should do is, instead of printing this inverted figure, it should print it more like a pyramid, and it should have 3, 6, 9, or it's actually 4, 7, 10, and 13 items in it. And so I'm not going to debug, I'm just going to run. Okay, and so it did, but we didn't do the other things to fix it. So it did print 4, 7, 10, and 13, but because well, there's a whole bunch of different things that we would need to change in order to make this look like an inverted period. We would have to have more spaces. We'd have to change this expression here for the number of spaces that started with, etc. So we didn't do that. And we'd also have to change the character was printing here, the character was printing here, but we could have done that. But anyways, let me get back to what I was trying to show you is how do you write your loop expressions for a nested loop. And this is how I want you to see you write the nested loop expressions. In fact, if you don't do this, you will not receive full credit, because without doing this, number one, I can't tell whether you did it or somebody else did it and just gave it to you. And number two, you're probably not going to understand it as well. So I'm going to require, anytime in this course you do nested loops like this, that you generate some documentation like that. Okay. The other thing I was trying to show you is how to debug. And so I showed you the run debug menu. In order for debugging to work, you have to have breakpoints. In fact, if I, let's see, remove all breakpoints. If I remove all breakpoints, and let's go back to the original expression here. Now if I run debug, without any breakpoints, it's not going to stop at all. It's just going to run through it. So you got to make sure you set a breakpoint, okay? Then you've got to do run debug. Another thing that happens to new students frequently is I showed you up here, set a breakpoint, and let me stop this and then do run debug again. Okay, so we're sitting here. What happens if you actually don't step over this but step into it? I'm not sure whether it's going to do it for me or not. No, it didn't do it. Sometimes in some people's configurations, it will actually step into the Java code for println. And that is a problem because generally you don't have the sources for println. So it's either going to give you an error. The debugger will say you're missing the source, or it will actually show you the source depending on how you set it up, in which case you're going to be really lost looking at what the heck is this code. So that's what the difference is between step over and step into. If you're set up properly, it's not going to matter for a line like this, but if you're set up somewhat improperly or in an advanced way, you'll end up actually stepping into Java code. If you do that, just step over, click step over until you get out of that routine. Okay, and again, so if I stepped over this top routine, it's not going to go into my routine and it just ends here. Okay, so what I really wanted to do, let me stop, run debug. What I wanted to do here was to step over the regular Java code and then step into my code here, okay? And then at this point, you can step over all you want. All right, so that's the basics of debugging. For this assignment, what I want you to do is I want you to step through this code until the point that you get to the row being the last row, row 4, and the colon being the last colon. Colon will be 2, okay? So let me jump forward to that point. Okay, so I've now skipped forward, and so the row is 4 and the colon is 2. Okay, that's the last part of this loop. And what I want you to do is take a screenshot of this screen showing both the code here and these values here. Okay, and that'll show me that you did actually debug this. And I also want to see a breakpoint. The breakpoint can be anywhere in here. Doesn't really matter. I just want to know that you did set a breakpoint and we were able to use the breakpoints. All right, that's all you need for the Hello World assignment and the introduction to debugging. Good luck.